Boom. I think it's working. We're going to give it a few moments for everything to materialize on the human plane. There we go. And yeah, greetings everyone. Let me know when you can hear me. It looks like it's working. So we've learned the hard way to wait for confirmation. But greetings everyone. At this stage of the journey, I believe it is Thursday, March 26th, or should I say, star date, March 26, 2026. And yeah, we're still live here on the physical earth plane. Somehow March is nearly over, which is a fun and somewhat frightening and kind of exciting thing all at the same time. Talk about the great acceleration of time and space. It's like we are living it, right? In a crazy, crazy way. And anyways, come on in. We're going to give it approximately 45 minutes for people to show up. No, not really. 4 to 5 minutes for people to show up. But in the meantime, greetings, everyone. It's good to see your faces in digital form. What up, White Swan, Way Shower? We got Laura Roach in the house. Hopefully my audio is okay. Let me know if the audio is okay. Or rather, let me know if the audio is not okay. What's up, Queen Victor? How's it going? Good to see you. We got Nora in the house. What's happening? Good to see you again. Hope all is well in the wilds of Switzerland out there. Boom. There we go. We got Aurora Diamond Heart as well. Greetings, everyone. So yes, we are back. I'm gonna get a couple announcements out of the way really, really quickly, so I don't forget them. And we're trying to get a little bit better at giving out the pertinent information in less than the first 30 minutes, so that people that are actually interested will find it. And so the only real substantial announcements that we have for this week prior to beginning our reading is number one, this Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern, we're going to be meeting in our Patreon group, the Blue Flame Collective, for our monthly energy clearing meditation. The most regular thing that I do every single month is meet with this group, and it keeps going and going. And so we're going to be meeting up last Sunday of the month, 4 p.m. Eastern. It is $20 for anyone who wants to attend. And you can just come one time, or you can join us and do the reading group and the energy clearing group. If you're available and want to take part in those, please do. But for those of you guys that have just been feeling, the waves of uncertainty or overwhelm, or at times physical pain, at times illness, just lack of energy within the body. Sometimes we've overabsorbed a tremendous amount of emotions and thought forms from other people, and a bunch of other combinations of just energies from outside of us. If you've been feeling the overwhelm, the uncertainty, the tension, possibly anxiety, and maybe a little bit of your own special mixture of rage or anger or resentment, whatever you want to call it, this has been, I think, one of the most reliable methods through which a small group of us in our community have sort of met up to sort of release the intensity of the modern day journey, here in these human bodies. And so, it's a group meditative journey that we go on, or really a process of opening up channels and gateways within the body. And I tend to not really advertise it that much. The most I usually talk about it these days is, in these brief moments on YouTube. I used to make more kind of formal announcements about it. And we might do that again in the future, but it's a really good, solid group of people, and it's been an honor to get to do that. And so if, just in case you've been out there feeling it and you've been wanting to become, which sounds kind of silly when I say this, you've been wanting to expose yourself to a different form of energetic activation or meditation, connection, whatever word you want to use to attach to it, free from, I would say, ulterior motives, free from power games, free from the starseed delusion mind virus that seems to be going around everywhere these days. If you want to connect with spirit and energy in a way that I think is true and unique for each person, I think this is a very good group for people to attend. And so if that's something that you're into, find us out there and join us. Thank you for posting that link. And What's up? Missing time. Yep. My language parameters are still a little weird, and let's just be real. I'm slowly turning more and more Chinese as time goes on. I say that respectfully and sincerely. At this point, I realize I can't really turn Russian because I can't handle the cold. Although, if I could choose, I would have probably turned Russian, but instead, I've decided to turn Chinese. So that's how it goes. Because we're living in a time where you can be anything you want to be, right? So, who are you to say I'm not? I might identify as an 80-year-old Chinese man, and there's nothing you can do about it, right? That's the current right? That's the current mindset on Earth. Or actually, it's not so much that anymore. A lot of that's sort of drained out, but there's still a real diehard like community of like I can be anything I want to be. Then maybe you should be a fire truck. Isn't that what we wanted to be when we were kids? It's like I didn't want to be the fireman. I want to be the fire truck, right? Anyway, Aurora Diamond Heart, you got it. They do have very better medicine. A lot of really cool stuff. I honestly have no idea. It's just a bit that it's like an extended long game bit that I do for like periods of time until I get bored of it. And then I'll just decide upon another thing. Like for a while I was ascending at every single chat group I was hanging out in on every show. And now that we've ascended, now we're turning Chinese. So I say that respectfully if you're a Chinese person. Some people would hear that and think, wow, okay. But no, I say it from a respectful perspective. Whoa, interesting choice of words. Anyway, for those of you guys, like I said, for those of you guys that want to join us, we're meeting up this Sunday. And then the second announcement, I'm trying to bring myself back to the business at hand. And then our second announcement is it's yet to be fully confirmed because I have not chosen a date for this, but we are revisiting our multidimensional tarot class. It's been a yearly thing. It continues to go on and it's coming up this May. So we have a little bit over a month away. I don't have a specific date. I'm going to put it up online very, very soon. There's a few things cooking up in, the background, but if you're one of the people that kind of breezes through this channel every once in a while, and I know in the past we did a lot of readings. Now nowadays a lot of those are done either on the times we do Rob's show, Typical Skeptic, or in Patreon. But as we get toward our launching date, we're going to be doing a lot more multidimensional tarot. And aside from that, if you're one of the people out there who's been going through your own processes of intuitive activation and you've figured out maybe in your own way that you really do have a talent for this, even if you don't know what to do or the meanings or how to go about doing it. A lot of us have noticed over the past few years how much your sensitivity has changed. And by you, I mean everyone that finds this video. Your sensitivity has changed, your discernment has changed. You're seeing and noticing a tremendous amount more than you used to within the eyes, within the voices, within the layers of unspoken, unseen data in this world. And since we're kind of going to be getting into the four gateways today, the second gateway of intuitive activation is divination, and that's where we learn to connect with spirit using a language, sometimes of our own design, or sometimes we fall back on things such as tarot or oracle cards, or hopefully not pendulums, but you can also use those as well. But ultimately what we're doing is externalizing a system through which we can communicate with spirit, whether that be the higher self, whether that be God as we understand it, whether that be the energy of other people. And I think one of the cool things about our tarot class is that it's reachable by anyone, like meaning anyone with a tarot deck can take this course and begin to learn how to read cards for themselves. And I'll add one thing that I never really add, and that is that especially if you don't know anything about astrology, because it's the least astrological version of tarot that you'll ever find. Some people will hear that and say, wow, that sounds like you're missing some pieces. Actually, those are all accounted for, just not labeled in the same way that we would do within traditional astrology. And so um, it's, I think, one of the most fascinating and unique ways within our community, within, probably anyone you'll ever meet, on how to read tarot, on how to, learn the meanings of the cards, how to understand yourself and your journey, the motivations of other people, the feelings of other people, the direction that your life is going in. We have incredible access to all kinds of layers of data and information. And I've noticed for a lot of people, some of the keys to opening those up often come from learning divination in some sort. And so, anyway, I'm not going to go on it, but it's coming up in May, and I'm looking forward to a whole new group of people that are going to be joining us. I have no idea who they are, but you will find this at the right time. So that said, okay, that's coming up in May. I think those are our only announcements for the moment. And we'll see if there's any questions. Usually there's not. That's okay. That probably means I'm answering everyone's questions, or it's just the same people that watch this show over and over again. So it's like, yeah, we already know. But anyway, let me know if you guys have any additional questions or comments before we get started. And as you know, our mission here today is to continue our sort of rite of passage through this strange, overly lengthy body of work published in June of 2024. And if you've been following along for the past couple episodes, or maybe you just kind of bounced in here and you're like, what the hell am I doing here? We are at the stage of the journey where we are working through the last third of this book, and our mission is now talking about the methods and the techniques and the ways in which you can facilitate your own intuitive awakening or activation, or like we mentioned, working your way through the gateways of intuitive activation in your own manner. And so, anyway, before I go on and on, we shall begin. And yeah, we're not gonna linger too long here today. But if anyone out there is following along, we are now at page 294, and we're starting this chapter, The Four Gateways of Psychic Activation, and how to begin this path for yourself. Now, before we do that, I'm going to give myself a little bit of feedback after looking back on a couple of the videos and reading through this book over the past, like, believe it or not, 16 weeks. Believe it or not, 16 weeks it took us to get through the first 2/3 of this book. And I will give myself a little bit of feedback because other people have given this to me as well. And I'm going to reiterate it again, just for the future versions of myself that are working on other books. And that is, number one, I mean, I think one of the only things that has taken away from my experience in reading back on a lot of this stuff is the vast amount of typos and errors and just like misspoken words within the, the deeper parts of the book. As I've read back over, doing this show, I have to admit, I'm shocked at how much, was not corrected. I mean, granted, this is not an edited body of work. There are certain chapters that were lovingly edited by a good friend of ours, a few of them here and there, which, you'll find those ones are very intact and well pieced together. And then there's the other 70% of the book where you're like, it feels like you just sort of blurted this out. And I did. It's exactly true. And so I would say the first thing that I noticed was, yeah, there's a good amount of typos, a good amount of things that should have been edited or clarified. And get ready for the weirdest part. There's even a chapter that I left out. There's an accidental chapter that I left out that did not make it into this book, and I don't know why. I don't know why I took it out. I don't know what the purpose of that was. I've spoken about it, I think, in a couple different places on certain lives and in, other settings, but there's a whole other chapter that I just completely threw out of this book, which coincidentally, and not that this really has anything to do with my previous comments. I was, making jokes about, Chinese stuff and various, other things. Although it's odd to note that the chapter that I left out of this book had a lot to do with lives that I had discovered in Asia, in what I believe to be the, 50s, 40s, decades ago, around the time of World War II. which it's more than decades ago. It's like 100 years almost now, right? Well, maybe not that long. My concept of time is horrible, but some time has passed, and so yeah, I'm completely left that out. I'm not sure if it would have impacted anything putting it back in, because by the time I had sent the book over to Amazon to be published, it was this thing where I had already left it out for a while, so I just decided to, like, sort of leave it there, um, which I think was probably the right choice. We might go into that if there's a request for it later on. But anyway, any other criticisms or feedback that I wanted to give myself? I would say that the flow of words is a little awkward in some places. I tried to write it the way that I speak, and I think in some cases that works well. I think in some ways it sort of adds a naturalness, and then I think in other areas, it sort of leaves me wanting for more detail rather than glossing over things at the time that I felt weren't necessarily as important, as maybe I see them differently now. And so I think in some ways I would have also worked differently on just the verbal flow and some of the things that I chose to emphasize about each experience in each story. And so there's also that. And then I guess lastly, which was one of the first kind of questions that I was given from somebody after writing or after this book came out, and that was that I didn't really talk too much about my life prior to the beginning of this awakening journey. The real personal history, which has to do with tremendous amounts of turbulence. I mean, shocking amounts of turbulence, all kinds of addictions, all sorts of negativity, and if you want to call it targeting, and just darkness, and a lot of, like, really heavy catalysts that I had to work through to even get to the point where I could enter this chapter of my life where I could even write this book. It was sort of hinted at the very start, where I had mentioned how I had made it through this, soul level attachment, and successfully navigated my way out of that. But it's funny because I didn't really go into detail on it. And one of the reasons for that was at the start of creating this book, it felt as though it wasn't important. And it's not so much that it had no importance, but that it wasn't important from the perspective of who I was now. It was almost like for me to dive back into that would have been another 200 and something pages long, going through certain experiences. And I think I made a choice to just jump in right before my life had changed rather than go back over it and say, well, here's how we got here, and here's how this started, and here's what happened there. And I think in the doing of that, I realized that's actually a whole other book. If I choose to, I feel that it's important that I talk about those things in the future, and I probably will. But in hindsight, I would have expanded upon it a bit more. It's just it's kind of hard knowing which parts to expand upon. And anyway, I think that's about it. I think those are my main criticisms of the moment, or kind of feedback on looking back at this strange 16 episode journey. I think there's a couple other things, but maybe I'll mention them later, maybe not. I'm also open to any feedback or anything that you guys have to talk about. Rami Salem says, "Please read the missing chapter." I have to find it. I have to find it. Well, I mean, honestly, I could just it's here on my computer. Um, I might. It's honestly, I don't know that it's that great. Maybe that's why I didn't put it in there. Well, I would say there's also an kind of accidental thing that no. Anyway, what's weird, and this will sound dumb to some of you guys. In my mind, it's in the book, and I had to go back over it and look and be like, "Whoa, I didn't actually reference that at all." And anyway, we will talk about it on a in a future episode. I can tell you that much. I definitely will. I wouldn't say it's too much of a carrot, to be honest with you, or a diamond heart. It might be interesting to some people, but I don't know if I would call it too much of that. Anyway, before I get too far off, because I have a tendency to not start reading until half an hour in, so we're going to start now. It's 20 minutes in, and we're going to begin. So we are starting from page 294, and we're going to begin with the four gateways of psychic activation, how to begin this path for yourself. In this section, we'll discuss a bit about what I've learned over the years when it comes to how we can effectively open and strengthen our psychic senses. Many of you are about to take a massive leap into an entirely new stage of your human journey, and this book is meant to help facilitate that change. Whether large or small, it doesn't matter. Some of you are already there, and others have barely begun. If you've been drawn to this work, or we could say if you've been drawn to this channel, it is because contained within it is a key to unlocking the next steps on the path of discovering who we are, why we came here, and what it is we intended to do with this time on earth. As you will have likely have noticed by now, for each of us, that process is entirely individual. What myself and many others who have gone through this process have invariably experienced is that for each of us, the path to true intuitive activation is entirely different for each person. In fact, that's an important point to make early on. There is no one size fits all approach to psychic activation, or what we might call intuitive development. And by personalizing or individualizing everything you do in an intuitive sense, you will be unlocking the depth of what you are capable of in ways that right now will seem like the stuff of Hollywood or fairy tale magic. Please be assured, you are your one greatest obstacle against psychic activation. And it is important to remember that old saying, whether you believe you can or you can't, you're right. From my experience, when it comes to psychic or intuitive ability, that statement is literally true. And I'll pause there to say once again, I really do believe that in my heart of hearts. I think for a lot of us, and especially people that I've worked with over the past few years, people will come to this stage, or I'll hear them say things like, well, I can't do it the way you can, or I see other people do this. And, the reality is, I think that we can, but we're sort of living within social groups and communities where there's such a large amount of comparison in between other people's stories and other people's experiences, that I think at times, based upon who we follow and the subject matter or just the frequencies that we take in, you're going to have a very distorted view about what that looks like. And I think it's important to hold on to that very early on. Your journey of intuitive development and awakening is going to look very, very different from anyone else's. Yes, there's going to be key similarities. There's going to be things that everyone's going to share with each other, and we're going to talk about that. But it really is an experience that people have to go through their own kind of unique worldview and their own individual timelines. And what I've noticed is that we are that. It's like at the start, you're the greatest obstacle you have to overcome in order to get this thing going. And that comes in many different forms. It comes from the mind, it comes from the body, it comes from our emotions. It comes from all kinds of stuff. It comes from belief systems that are cast upon us at earlier stages of the journey. And so I really believe that you are the one true obstacle. And if you're one of those people that is willing to take a leap of faith and believe in yourself, even if you don't know how or when or what, or the way things are going to go, if you're willing to sit there and go, you know what, I can. I don't know how yet. I don't know what to do. I'm not sure how to awaken or to grow or to, nurture this part of myself, but I know it can be done. I know it can be done. I've seen it happen with other people. I've maybe you've tasted little bits of it in your own life. I think if you're willing to hold yourself in that place, that's really all that's needed in the beginning. Sort of like how they say in the law of one, the only requirement for service is the desire to be of service. Similar concept. If you believe you can, then you can. If you believe you can't, then you never will. And, I shouldn't make it as hard and fast as that, but that's been my experience thus far. I have to be real. Thinking Joanna says, "I don't think grammatical errors really matter." Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I know for me, I have a lot of perfectionism issues, like when I do certain things. So it's like like a lot of us, it's like I will only look at the broken parts for a while first and be like, "Oh my god," and I'll forget about all the good parts. Um, but thank you. I definitely I sort of agree. I sort of agree. Anyway, we're gonna keep going. We're living in a time on Earth in which each and every human being on this planet has a very distinct set of psychic or intuitive abilities. There's nothing supernatural about it. These abilities are available to all who seek and are willing to devote themselves to a new stage or aspect of your evolving human identity. One of the easiest ways to describe this is through the world of video games. Even if that world is completely foreign to you, and I understand it is to probably a lot of our viewers, but if it's not, you will likely be aware on some level of the process of choosing your character, especially in the world of role playing games. At the start of each game, you'll make a choice as to what kind of character you want to become. And in many ways, we made choices just like this prior to entering this world. While some may disagree harshly with this idea, I do believe we choose many aspects of what we will experience and endure in this life. It's referenced in the Law of One a lot. They call it, catalysts to growth. And, don't mistake that for meaning that it's a good thing or a fun thing. You know what I mean? These are the things that we've chosen to allow into our incarnational cycle so that we can grow from them, so that we can heal from them, so that we can create change with them. And anyway, getting back to what's written, not all of them, mind you. It's not that we decide ahead of time on every single thing, but we do give license to the many twists and turns that we will endure in this world, knowing full well what can happen or how it could go. For the majority of this is entirely known prior to coming here. And for nearly every single one of us, we then choose to enter the earth realm, knowing full well that the moment we are born, nearly all of that is wiped from our mind as we go through what some call the amnesia layer, sometimes compared to the process of entering the birth canal itself. I've heard that reference that during the actual birthing process, as the baby's coming out, that's the amnesia layer that they're going through, and that's where we begin to sort of take the consciousness takes more of a human form, and a lot of the data and knowledge that we held previous to that begins to drain out. And then other people will say, well, my son or my daughter had full knowledge of their past lives for a number of years, and that's also very possible up until about age 5 or 6. I know a lot of people watching also have kids as well, but you know how the crown closes at a certain point. I forgot the name of it. At the top of a child's head, that little, as the crown fully forms, and closes for a lot of us, that's where the amnesia layer takes more of a firm hold in the body. And there's usually a stage around 5 or 6 years old, maybe sometimes sooner, sometimes later. There's even some people that will maintain it throughout their entire life. But there is invariably a stage where that sort of takes over, and we have to do this life here now. And a lot of that data gets kind of pulled away. We can regain it. We can definitely get it back. Maybe not all of it. I don't think we're meant to get it all back, which for some people sounds kind of odd, because they spend such huge amounts of time exploring, past lives or trying to understand who they were, which I think is a cool stage. I've spent years looking at that. I mean, I'm not immune to it, but I think in doing so, what I discovered was that my mission is here and now. It's about this life here. And so, anyway, not to go on and on. Anyway, let's go back. Where were we? Okay, the earth realm, knowing full well that the moment we are born, nearly all of that is wiped from our mind as we go through what some call the amnesia layer, sometimes compared to the process of entering the birth canal. From there, we become new once again and will live the rest of our human lives with the hidden goal of remembering what it was that we intended to do or become before we got here. While the outcomes are never guaranteed, we do agree on the vast amount of challenges in this life that we endure in a cyclical fashion. until we correct, change, or alter our paths. Some are karmic, some are soul contracts, some are even gifts and rewards that may come to us at certain stages, provided we meet certain requirements or make certain changes. In truth, it goes a lot deeper than that, but this is the most simple way I can describe it. Just like when choosing your character in a role playing game, you made decisions prior to entering this realm. This is a part that some people do not agree with, but I'm being real. Just like when choosing your character in a role playing game, you made decisions prior to entering this realm. We chose our parents, we chose our bodies, we chose many significant aspects of this journey. And just as in the video game realm, we also choose certain secret abilities, events, even hidden traits that will activate at specific times in this life cycle. In some cases, these transformational changes are inevitable. We call this the path of destiny. For others, it's a choice they will make to begin embracing and bringing in a new character at some point in the life cycle. This process of choosing a new character is something that has transformed my life in a truly remarkable way. And I will pause there to say I cannot stress that enough. What I was shown, and I've kind of referenced this and overtalked it many, many times over the years, but what I was shown was that right around age 40, we get one of our first most notable character shift opportunities, and that the fourth decade for a lot of us is the decade in which we begin to have much more control over what some would call our version of reality, which is opens the door to a lot of like kind of fanciful wondering. Although I do believe it is very true, and within that fourth decade, that represents one of the first choice points in which we can either one change our character and bring about a new timeline, or two remain in the previous character and sort of live under what we call dictated reality, which is what the world is giving us, what they're handing us, what they're telling us is real. And the crazy thing is there's really no penalty for staying the same. It's not that anyone suffers, it's just that we remain in that state that we were in. And then right around I know we get a similar one around age 50, and every decade or so after the fourth decade, it seems, comes with sort of a timeline and identity shift. And it doesn't have to be a complete changeover. In some cases, it's an evolutionary shift or an adding on to certain things, but it's usually designated by us making that first choice. And not to say that it has to happen in the fourth decade. There's people that do have it in their 30s. It's very rare that it happens before Saturn a return, age 28 to 30. It very rarely happens before that, because that's sort of one of the natural transition points for everyone anyway. So you're going to experience a change there regardless. But that one is meant to set us up for the work that we're going to be doing later on. And so anyway, not to go on and on about it, but I'll check some of your questions or comments here. See, if I sit back with glasses on, I can see the screen perfectly. If I get like up here, it gets weird. But yeah, there we go. Diana got it. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. I always forget the name. Joanna says full knowledge, maybe some knowledge, but I could be wrong. I absolutely believe it. Some people are able to maintain that. You know what I mean? There are a lot of people that can maintain it. What's up, Phoenix? How's it going? And anyway, we shall keep going. From there, we become new again. And oh, there we go. Sorry, I rewound back a whole a whole two paragraphs. We call this the path of destiny. For others, it is a choice they will make to begin embracing and bringing in a new character at some point in the life cycle. And that was where we commented upon the first notable one right around age 40. This process of choosing a new character is something that has transformed my life in a truly remarkable way. My God, I cannot stress this enough. When I went through my initial awakening journey, I remember being shown this dynamic in staggering detail. I was shown in my own wandering meditations that I had chosen certain events in my life that were destined to happen. It didn't matter when or where, it was just something that was coming, and there was no way I could avoid it. It might be like that for you, or it could be a very different story. There are countless versions of us involved in this process. And as we learn to change timelines, we can dramatically alter our paths in this human realm, which, at risk of diving into like some, cringeworthy kind of like new age starseed terminology, despite the fact that it's cringe, it's literally real. I really believe that is the fundamental thing that occurred for me in summer of 2015, and then at a number of different intervals after that. It was a literal timeline shift. We go from one version of reality into a slightly different version. It's not always like shockingly different, you know what I mean? There there's always going to, remain certain similarities, but we can dramatically alter our timeline. At this point, 9 years into this, I believe that that's exactly what happened for me. When I was going through the latter stages of my initial activation in summer of 2017, I was shown that I had an entirely new world awaiting me. Looking back now, that was literally true. Even though I did not know what it was or how it would go, I was completely willing to sacrifice my old self in order to enter a new stage of existence. I'm not saying this is a requirement for everyone. For some, it is a soft and gradual transition, and for others, it will come after years of deep dysfunction, countless traumas, and then a concerted decision to leave it all behind or transmute it all in favor of entering completely uncharted territory. I can say for me, that's what it was. It's absolutely what it was. It was not a soft and gradual transition. It was like something that just happened, and it took a lot of bullshit in my life in order for that to take form. It was like there's a tremendous amount of suffering, and I don't mean that from the perspective of a victim. I mean that from the perspective of the person who is responsible for it, which was me. Absolutely. Absolutely me. And so one thing that really helped me at that stage was something I still practice and have talked about in a previous chapter of this book: mirror work, which some people cringe when I talk about it. But the type of mirror work I mean is different from what you might think, though. It wasn't only about facing the darkness within me and looking it in the eyes. This type of mirror work was about looking at myself with deep love and hope, peering into my face, my body, my energy, and deciding what the new version of me would be like. How did this new version of me speak? How did we hold our body? How did we walk? What kind of style did I have? What hand did I use to write? What pocket did I hold my wallet in? What kind of things did this new version of me eat? What did he love? What did he hate? What did we believe in? I even spent time learning to change my handwriting, my signature, and claim my entire name for the first time in my life. For the first 39 years of my life, I had been Matt. And when this great character change, timeline shift, walk in experience took place, I realized I was going to claim every piece of me in an entirely new way. I wouldn't even answer to people that used to call me Matthew because I just hated that name. And I was one of those people that grew up hating the name I was given, like bitterly hating it. And I was like, nope, I'm Matt. I don't answer to any of that other shit. I'm just this. I even thought about changing it to a different name, but that felt disingenuous to me. And so I took full ownership over my full name and began announcing myself as Matthew Aaron Mornian, which is my actual real name. I've even seen some people change their names entirely, but I chose instead to fully embody every piece of me, good or evil, right or wrong, and allow it to turn itself into something new. I believe if you truly want to change your character and alter your identity in this life, you need to be willing to completely redefine everything about who you've been up until this point in your journey. I'm not saying that all those changes I made stuck or that they were even necessary, because they weren't. I'm just going to be real about that. Um, it was that I think I was ready to go to a number of extremes in order to change a pathway in my life. And I think with that, I needed to change the energy that I was known by. And not only did I kind of claim my full name in a sense, which sounds kind of silly to a lot of people, but I really did sit there and ask myself, like, who is this person now? What am I becoming? What do they look like? What are their tendencies? You know what I mean? I did actually, well, I'm going to talk about this more in a second, so I'll just get back into it. I'm not saying that all those changes I made stuck or that they were even necessary. In truth, it proved nearly impossible for me to switch my writing hand. I did try, though. I'll just say this. I guess in some ways I was blessed at being kind of, what's the word? Am- Ambidextrous for most of my life, because I'm kind of a weird hybrid between left-handed and right-handed. And I really, really genuinely practice writing with my right hand. In fact, even as a child, I remember being in like second grade, back when they used to teach cursive here. And I was always writing with my left hand because that's what was natural. And they would have this teacher that would come around and literally grab my hand and take the pencil out of it and put it in my right hand and push my hand on the paper and be like, no, use this hand. You know what I mean? And I was like, they actually, that was a thing that they did, at least at the schools that I was going to as a kid. They would force everybody to be right-handed. And so I had some experience, forcing myself to write with my other hand. But as I was going through this sort of identity shift kind of stage, I tried to return back to that. And I was like, "Okay, I'm going to start writing with my just because it was like I was willing to take any step necessary to differentiate myself from the previous timeline. It was like anything that I had to do to separate myself from that old version of reality. And it wasn't because I was suffering, it wasn't because it was killing me. It wasn't because I, was going through this horrible crisis. It was just that's what was supposed to happen. And that's honestly part of what I meant, when I said like some of these things were just going to take place regardless. And you guys will have maybe something similar in your own life where you will choose to take upon yourself this act of transformation where it's like in some ways you have to force yourself to do things differently. And so, that was an example of it. Um, but anyway, let us keep going here. I'm not saying that all those changes I made stuck or that they were even necessary. In truth, it proved nearly impossible for me to switch my writing hand. I don't even know why I thought it was necessary. It's hilarious now, actually. I've been left-handed my entire life, and I still am to this very day. I think for me and some others out there, such extremes will be necessary to fully awaken a different version of you. But for others, it might not be so intense. And I pray you will honor wherever you find yourself in that process. I spent a lot of time in active contemplation each day during the time between 2015 and 2017 as I progressed through that stage of my life. I would often meditate for a ridiculous amount of time asking these questions. And I mean like hours a day. And this is not an exaggeration. This is not in any way an exaggeration. It was just what I did at that time. And it was really the only thing that I knew to do. And, between that and like doing Qigong in my backyard, they were pretty much all the only things I could do. And it sucks to think that I got so much blame for it, in the relationship I was in at the time. It was like the more I dove into that version of myself, the more I became, in the eyes of who I was with or the world that I was in at that time, the more weaker I became, the more undesirable I became, the more different. You're not like you anymore. You changed. It's, yeah, good. You know what I mean? And that was a difficult thing for me to deal with, but these were the only places in which I was able to find peace, I think, in some way. It was the only places in which I felt secure or safe. Honestly, I could even say safe. At the time, I did not know why or what it was I was even doing, but I know these questions were at the forefront of my mind. I could see a transformation happening, and I chose to fully embrace everything about it. A part of me thinks, actually, I know that I had a lot of help from the spirit realm during this process. One thing you need to know beyond the shadow of a doubt that I pray will become deeply ingrained in your very being is that we all have helpers, guides, guardians, whatever you want to call it in this life, many of them actually. Know that in meditation and the quieting of the mind, you will find that they will begin to speak to you as you go through this process. I think my first experiences with this came in the days just after my initial crown chakra opening. It was as if an entire choir of voices began to rise up inside my mind, and all of them had very distinct personalities. It was as if all the many spirit guides and other versions of me on different planes of existence began chiming in with new thoughts, new ideas, new desires, and even certain issues that I needed to overcome in order to fully understand what it was that they were telling me. And I will pause there to say that I believe was one of the most transformational elements of that, and something that I've just noticed in the work that I do now. It's a very common question. It's a very common request from those that will book is, you know, how do I understand what spirit is telling me? Not so much like who are my guides, although people ask that so much, it's crazy. And in many cases, we're not supposed to know. Some cases we can know. In nearly all cases, it's a revolving door of many individuals or souls that will come and go from our life. In most cases, they're aspects of self on other planes, but they're also our ancestors, our family members. There's even members of each family who choose not to incarnate just so they can specifically be the one that's hanging out there in the spirit realm to be of assistance to you. It's a crazy, crazy thing. But if you're wondering, how might I open up a channel to receiving that data from spirit or guides, or we can even say God as I understand it, what pathway, what energy center might I work with within the body in order to facilitate that shift, or at least to open that door so I can sense it or hear it or experiencing it in my own specific way? Because for you, it might not show up like a conversation. It might show up like a vision. It might show up like a sensation in the body. It might show up like a memory of something. It might show up through music. It might show up through animals, through the words of your children, through strange messages that come through the television at times and seem to synchronistically say something that you were thinking, which is a weird one because we also deal with so much interference in this world that it takes a lot of discernment to know, when is that an element of mental illness, because you got to remember that prior to doing this, I spent so much time within traditional psychology that most of what I was experiencing at that stage of my life from a clinical perspective would have been called psychosis in some form. It would have been called some form of, insanity that was, going on in my head or, my life. And I think disarming that assumption is a very delicate thing to do, because for some of us, it is going to be a very problematic internal, conversation that is going on. And in some cases, that can actually go a little bit wrong and it can cause a lot of mania. But anyway, to get back to where would you work within the body in order to facilitate that opening? It's not that there's just one place, but the most reliable place would be the crown chakra. Absolutely. Like the crown chakra, I would say with a really deep and powerful crown chakra opening, the majority of people on the earth plane will experience a probably temporary, but in some cases permanent opening of the mind's eye, of thought processes. You could get a little manic in the wrong hands. You could go crazy for a time. I have to be totally real about that. But you can very reliably and very accurately open up that gateway within the body. It's just in some cases we're not ready for it. In some cases, it happens automatically. I think for a lot of us, as we go through this awakening journey, there is a gradual opening, or what we would call like a blooming of certain energy centers in the body. And so, anyway, I'm getting way off track with commentary as usual. But anyway, I'll check for your questions in a moment. We're going to read through the next paragraph and then I'll pause. It was as if all the many spirit guides and other versions of me on different planes of existence began chiming in with new thoughts, new ideas, new desires, and even certain issues that I needed to overcome in order to fully understand what it was they were telling me. That was very confusing at the start, and I will admit it was also quite maddening because there was definite. Well, honestly, the entire time I questioned, have I just lost my mind, or is this really happening? And I think some of the stages after the crown chakra opening, there was so much going on within that internal environment. It was like I could hear other voices talking about me here in this body, like making comments about me. And it wasn't like it was crazy. It wasn't like, they weren't necessarily making fun of me or saying evil things. Honestly, they never said anything, negative or evil. It was as if they were commenting upon my actions and my thought forms and sort of giving me this sort of running kind of commentary with everything that I was doing, which I think because I had become so open at that stage, it was overwhelming. It was overwhelming because I could just hear it all the time. If I sat there in silence, I could sort of lean back and like, oh my God, like this whole choir of voices would kick in. As I have said previously, I know there are not too many places where we can openly discuss this dynamic. For the majority of the world, the idea of hearing voices or having internal conversations inside your body is still relegated to the world of mental illness and schizoid disorders. It makes me wonder about all those suffering with their own versions of this, and I believe this book is in part meant for those of you who are trying to gain a new understanding of what the modern world still calls mental illness. I'm not saying you will have the same experience I did, but one thing you will notice in the process of creating a new character in this life and truly transforming yourself is that you will begin to experience a very different type of inner dialogue. And I have to say that is absolutely, completely true. I've watched it happen with me. I've watched it happen with numerous clients that I've worked with over the years. Um, all kinds of people. And I've even worked with a lot of people that have full out schizophrenia, full on psychosis, that are completely separated from our version of reality in very, very troubling ways. I've worked with a number of those people for like extended periods of time. And some of them are, honestly, most of them have been the most fascinating and in many cases brilliantly talented people that I have ever worked with. And it really brings me to the idea that a lot of what happens with certain types of mental illness diagnosis in this world are really at times mislabeled intuitive or psychic awakening. And based upon, the wounds, the toxicity, the thought forms, the previous programming we had, it'll either be something that you might embrace and allow to continue, or it'll be something that you'll medicate away instantly. You'll be like, oh no, this is crazy, better get on meds right away. But regardless of where it goes, I think for a lot of us this is an opportunity rather than a death sentence or some great punishment. And if you are one of those people out there that has experienced some of these states of madness, whether it be through bipolar mania, psychosis, your own schizoid disorders, um, I honestly believe that for nearly everyone that has those types of diagnosis, you could probably be one of the most amazing psychics or healers or practitioners of spirit that there ever will be. It's just that the way our world works, you'll get labeled as crazy. And if you stick into that, if you stay in that like paradigm, you'll end up believing it, which honestly what was happening to me at many intervals in this. One of the reasons why I titled the book the way I did, because I really believed for so long, almost 2 years, until I met the person I dedicated this actual book to, Britton. I really was holding myself under the idea every day that I had fractured my mind. And I remember sitting there, like, honestly, literally crying, literally weeping, going, okay, I have absolutely brain damaged myself. I have, ruined some pathway in my brain. My neurochemistry is so fucked now that I'm hallucinating all this shit. And I'm hearing all these voices. And there were times when I felt really, really heavily into that. And I was convinced that I had lost my mind. And then there was other times where it was like I would literally look at someone and guess exactly what they were doing, and I would find out later on it was literally true. I sort of referenced a few moments like that in the earlier parts of the book. There was so many more that I can't even get into them now. But before I rant on and on, I'm going to check your questions because I saw a couple questions roll through. What's up, Tiffany Marie? How's it going? Boom. Eric says, crazy ambidextrous. Blew me away with saying if you could go back in time, you go to the 1920s just to experience it and do the same. Wow. Yeah, probably. I probably was. I would talk about I was talking about that on Anchor Haven show last night. I wouldn't be like a historical time traveler. I would just go travel around and look at cool stuff. You know what I mean? Or maybe I would. I don't know. Who knows? No, I am not dyslexic. I am neither right or left eye dominant, which is a problem. So I would say more right eye, but I have a weird problem with both left and right side. I'm like such a bizarre mix of both of them. I can do most things right or left-handed except for right at this stage. I mean, I can still write with my right hand better than most people can write with their opposite hand, but not in a way that like yeah, not in a good way. It doesn't, you know what I mean? It doesn't factor in at this stage. Joanna says, do you believe that our guides can turn against us while assigned to us or not really be working for our good alone? Yeah, totally. However, I think that at times we welcome different aspects of spiritual guidance, and based upon our focus and what we're into and our thoughts and our emotions, we can attract like different aspects of self or shadow elements of other selves, which can greatly influence, you know, our life at times. Um, I think that for some of us, we can have an experience that we're meant to have, where we will have to learn how to, you know, claim autonomy over layers of spiritual influence that at times could be, you know, things that we would call like negative spirit guides or not or whatnot. I also think that you can, which sounds cheesy, it's like you can sort of fire the ones that you have or request new guidance. I think that is a real thing that you can do. And so, you know, I would like to think that most of the non-physical relationships that we make with spirit are there to guide us. But like, look at what's happening on the earth plane right now. We've seen, I think, irrefutable proof, although not physical, that there's a vast amount of people walking around this world with very negative influences that are really not working in their best interest. I mean, sure, they could benefit your life in a physical way, but at the same time, it's eroding the spirit. And so, anyway, not to go too far into your question, but yeah, I believe it's possible. To what extent, I'm not sure, you know, how deep and how far it goes for each person. I can't say that I know exactly. I can tell you that I have definitely perceived at times forms of just not appropriate guidance that has been around me. I would say most actively during the period of time in which I had physically connected with, you know, some reptilian, you know, thing. I had talked about that in a previous chapter. Around that stage, when a lot of that was going on, I think that a number of presences were brought to me that were beings or energies that I could, you know, connect with, that wanted to connect with me, but it wasn't for the purpose of, you know, betterment. It was for, honestly, for the purpose of weaponization. If you want to get technical, I think that that would have been not the end result, but one of the results of further, you know, like connecting with their energy, is that I would have got weaponized in some way. And maybe I have been. I don't know. You know, anyway, let's keep going. White Swan says, not only do some opt to not incarnate, some apparently choose to, yes, choose to die very young to be there on the spirit side as a helper for us. I absolutely agree with that. Absolutely. It happens all the time. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Boom. Anyway, let's keep going. Eric says, my dad used to tell me it's okay to talk to yourself, but if you answer yourself, then you're crazy. I always answer myself, right? I do as well. Don't worry. I definitely do. It's a, going back to the content of the book, I think as we step into these new versions of ourselves, allow our identities to shift, allow ourselves to go through deep changes of our persona, our focus, our understanding of self. I think, like I said, your internal dialogue will absolutely change. I I could nearly guarantee it. You know what I mean? For some people, it'll be different than dialogue, so we're gonna leave that door open. But you might find yourself in a much more active conversation, within the inner self or within your mind, which once again, for the uninitiated or the unawakened, or, not that I'm trying to make it a negative thing, for those who have not yet taken that step in their life, they will perceive that as mental illness. And to make it even weirder, it doesn't mean it's not. It doesn't, because sometimes it is, right? Totally. I think you can. You can say, I need different guidance. I need to rely on a different aspect of myself. Please bring to me those that can show me these things. And, not to say that that'll happen, not to say that it's always that simple, but I think that setting that intention and like requesting these things of spirit, I think is very helpful. I also think writing it down physically by hand has a value that a lot of people tend to forget these days, unless you're one of those people who just has a tendency of writing by hand already. But, based upon our current society, that's going away fast, right? But I think if you're willing to write new contracts for yourself, and if you're willing to keep somewhat of like a journal of sorts of your thoughts and of honestly your true heart's desires and what you really believe and what you really call into existence in this world. I was shown years and years and years before any of these things ever took place in my life that I had an ability to write things down and have them come true. And I didn't really take it seriously. I was like, oh, yeah, sure, whatever. And it's funny because, as I've changed over the years, I've kept some of those original journals from, 2007, 2008, 2009. And it's crazy because when I went back at one point and looked at just little bits of it, I realized like a lot of that had happened. Tremendous amount of it actually took place. And so I think when we're going through the process of welcoming new spiritual guidance, maybe we could say firing guides that aren't really working in our best interest, or are sort of playing more with our negative tendencies and keeping us stuck rather than not. I think writing it down and creating contracts or in renegotiating certain terms in your life is very helpful. But then again, if you also look at the concept of negative guides, I think for some people those serve as a greater catalyst for change, because at a certain point, it's like you'll choose to sort of break that chain or sever that tie. And maybe that was the actual mission the whole time, was that, okay, well, you're going to get to experience the dynamic of, inappropriate spiritual guidance. And it's not about what the content of that guidance is giving you. It's about you coming to the stage where you realize, you know what, this isn't actually in my best interest. This is not the version of me that I want to be right now. And then you initiate the separation. It feels like for a lot of us, that is the end goal, meaning that we're meant to go through that period of, strange guidance, so that we'll go like, wait, hold on. I might be wrong. I'm kind of over I'm over answering that. But Tiffany just pulled up to her son's jujitsu class. Hell yeah. Way to go. um, that's awesome. Eric says, are our guides just another version of self? I think in many cases, yes. Aspects of self on other timelines, family members, ancestors, in some cases, just, beings from the spirit realm. Yes, extraterrestrials, if you want to call them that. Higher dimensional aspects of self, which can, I think, in many cases, take form of all kinds of, honestly, whatever they need to be, if you want to get technical, which would be kind of a good way to perceive a fifth density life form. It's going to show up in whatever form it needs to in order to, uh, you know, have an impact or to do what it needs to do or to follow its path, meaning it's not tied to one singular identity. It's more of a force of living energy at this point. And anyway, I'm going too far, so we're going to get back to the reading here. But thanks, you guys. Thank you for your questions. It's very helpful. Okay, where are we at here? Oh, right. We were just talking about how, for the majority of the world, hearing voices would be considered mental illness. I'm not saying you'll have the same experience I did, but one thing you'll notice in the process of creating a new character in this life and truly transforming yourself is that you will begin to experience a very different type of inner dialogue. We covered that. In addition to choosing a new character, there are a number of other processes or paths that many of you will inevitably run into on this journey. In fact, the character change process is merely the first step for many of us. After that, we must learn to continually and fully embody this version of ourselves in any way we can. In the mere 7 years since beginning this stage of my life, I have learned many things about how the process of psychic activation really works. Just enough to know that I know nearly nothing at all. Seriously, I think that is an inevitability for a lot of us that kind of follow this path and really devote ourselves to this change. It's like the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know anything. And then you see other people out there pumping themselves up in their superior knowledge and doing this new age world's word salad. And it's like, you're just like, oh, really? Okay. And it's not that you can call people out on that. No one likes to be called out on it, but you're gonna see a lot of that. And anyway, before I get off track, like I just said, in fact, the character change process is merely the first step for many of us. After that, we must learn to continually and fully embody this new version of ourselves in any way we can. In the mere 7 years, now 9 years, believe it or not, we're coming up on 9 in July, actually. In the mere 7 years since beginning this stage of my life, I have learned many things about how the process of psychic activation really works. Just enough to know I know nearly nothing at all. For those who've read the early parts of this book, you will be aware that I really never had any formal training in becoming a psychic. The majority of what I've learned was through direct experiences of my own and with those who I've worked with. I learned early on that when we allow it, spirit will begin teaching us in our own ways through the contact with our guides in that internal space. And I'm proud to admit this is where the majority of this data comes from. Now, that was an awkwardly worded sentence in one of the examples, where I should have edited certain things. What I mean by that was that I believe that I am an example of what it looks like for a person who has been educated by spirit, which for some people is such a cringe thing to say. Other people will hear that and go, oh, really? Okay. But at this point of my life, there really is no other explanation for it, because the absolute honest to God truth is there was never a class, there was never a book. The mentoring that I had was so limited and short term. It was like I was just thrown out there and forced to become this thing. And I believe that in that process, it was like spirit or the guides that I chose to connect with. And I would like to think in some way that I made proper choices in the beginning, at least in terms of, who I welcomed into my field and who I welcomed into my life, because the data and the information that I have been given as a result of that, it's like literally for over 8.5 years now, it has shown up as being correct the majority of the time. Now, granted, there will always be key moments in which we're going to be so off the mark. And if you're doing this work and you're not having those, I always say, are you even doing anything? If you're not getting it wrong at certain intervals in really painfully embarrassing ways, I believe you're neither not trying hard enough, or you're staying too safe, or you're staying confined to the area of knowledge that you can humanly apprehend rather than opening the door for something greater. I think for me, in the beginning, the only thing I could do was open the door for something greater because I did not have any knowledge to work with. I had no experience. I talked about in some of the earlier chapters how when I went to work at Liberate, which is the real name of the store, when I went to work at Liberate, I had zero experience. The first professional tarot reading I ever gave to anyone in this life was in the interview to work at that store. And even then I was like, um, boom. And I just went for it. It was like a door opened and I'm like, okay, here we go. Boom. And I would just talk. And in some ways, I would like to think that would be a testament to, the process of being educated by spirit and maybe a testament to the process of choosing the right forms of spiritual guidance. Not to say that doesn't change, but that's really, really, really how it was for me. There was no, path of instruction. There was trial and error. There was people that I watched fail and people that I watched succeed and people whose words I listened to and sort of studied. And at the time, I have to be real, a lot of that I honestly didn't really agree with, and I still don't agree with it till this day, which I hate to say is still one of my feelings about the majority of the starseed influencer mind virus kind of friend groups, where it's like there's so much self-importance and there's so much over-reliance upon earth-based knowledge rather than interface with spirit and just connecting in the I don't know, but let's find out type of mindset that it really has me questioning so many of the people that I see that claim to be experts, because it's like when you actually feel the energy behind it, you're like, where did this actually come from? You sound like the perfect mix of every other person's live stream and a snippet of every other influencer we've heard. And it's almost like you just chose the pieces of it that fit in with your limited worldview and allowed your path forward to be sort of identified by those sort of things that you've gathered from others. And not to say that's any better than the way I did it, because I had no way to do it. I was like, I have no idea how to understand what direction to go in within this realm. And one thing I did know is that what I was hearing from other people at that time, it didn't feel right, and I couldn't follow it. And I've talked a lot about this. We'll reference it again later in many different ways. It was like that for me when I started doing energy work. It was like all I had were these really weak examples of people that were like, well, just create the column of light or put yourself in a bubble of Archangel Michael's essence or something, and all your problems will go away. I've said this a million times, but I was very willing to do that. I was like, yeah, sure, sounds good. Let's do it. Call in the Pleiadians. They'll do it for us. Archangel Michael will roll in with his homies and all the bad things will go away. And there was a time when I practiced those beliefs with a whole heart. Like I was really fully like, yep, let's do it. And I have to admit, the results were next to none. The results were sort of like a scent of something. You smell it down the street and you're like, oh, it smells good. Wow. It's not here. It's all the way over there. And you're smelling or you're perceiving something that exists, but is not with you. You know what I mean? Not to say that it's never with you. It's just, it was a thing that I noticed early on. There was like such little potency in everything I was being shown. But everyone surrounding me was like, this is it. This is the ultimate. And I was like, really? I'm not saying I'm doing any better, but are you guys really into this? Okay. All right. I was still willing to play along for a long time. And so anyway, let's keep going before I get too caught up in this part. I learned early on that when we allow it, spirit will begin teaching us in our own ways through the contact with our guides in that internal space. And I'm proud to admit this is where the majority of this data comes from. I'd like to think I'm an excellent example of a truly organic awakening process in that it was not prompted by any kind of desire or drive to become this thing I am now. What I mean by that is I didn't choose it. It chose me. Prior to this stage of my life, it was not something I was seeking. It was something that happened for me, not to me. The more I continued to let go and allow what was happening inside me, the more I was granted a constant stream of information. and guidance that I still rely on to this very day. And I have to clarify that. I really did not ever, at any stage of my human life, prior to 2017, when I met, Britain and this whole chapter began, prior to that, I never at any stage ever was like, "You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna become a professional psychic and do this, all this invisible shit with people who don't even believe that I'm real and have to force myself into social groups and learn through trial and error all these painful things about how the world perceives that and, still stand in my power to become an authentic version of it." I had never any desire to that. I didn't ever, you know what I mean? I never cared about tarot. I didn't care about, anything other than the nuts and bolts ancient alien, like they're out there. I know they're out there and I'm going to see them. You know what I mean? That was as far as I went. That was as far as I went. I had, like many of you already know, I had a grandfather who was a contactee, and I was fine with that. I never considered myself to be in the midst of that. In fact, I considered myself to be in a loss because I hadn't tangibly experienced those things. I had never, you know what I mean? I had never experienced any of that up until 2015. But it's weird because I do remember this one moment, like honestly, it's funny because my son actually brought this like into my memory, which is crazy because at that time of my life, everyone thought I was crazy. But I remember picking my son up from school one day, and we were just having one. He was in like, what was it, like sixth grade or something, and they're just talking about like career choices as they do when you get into middle school. And like, I think I'm going to become this, or I'm going to become that. And I remember saying some really weird shit to my son. I was like, I think in the coming years, I'm going to learn how to put my energy inside other people's bodies and work with their organs and their spirit. And I remember him being like, what? Or just something along those lines in a really weird, matter of fact, bizarre way. And I remember him going, huh? You know how your kids are just like, what? Shut up, dad. And I was like, yeah. And it just came and went. It was like a statement that came out of my mouth and just drifted off somewhere. And it was wild because I was essentially describing what I do now, not realizing that I was describing what I was going to do in the future. And I just remember that moment sitting in the car looking at my son Bailey, and he's like, huh, shit, whatever, and that's actually what happened. And I think it was maybe less than a year or so ago, he actually reminded me of that conversation. And I had totally forgotten about it. Actually, it was more than a year ago. Anyway, it was some time ago. He reminded me of that conversation, and I was like, "Whoa, dude. Crazy, crazy." Anyway, let's get back to it. Sorry to go on so long here. Where it was something that happened for me, not to me. The more I continued to let go and allow what was happening inside me, the more I was granted a constant stream of information and guidance that I still rely on to this very day. While it continues to be a highly individual process for each of us, there are a few major elements of self improvement or discovery that I believe each of us must undertake in order to be truly effective in interfacing with spirit. While the path is not limited to just these things alone, I have learned there are often four pillars of development that true psychics, mystics, or practitioners of spirit will inevitably take part in. In looking back, I believe these things have greatly aided me in continuing the path of intuitive development in an effective manner while ensuring I remain healthy and vital during this process. Which, there's a whole other conversation we can go into there because I believe I have, I guess, if you want to use the word, suffered or dealt with the consequences of not maintaining the self in light of what I do as well. And it definitely takes a toll on you. Doing this work will absolutely take a toll on you. Those that really make it their life path, those that give themselves over, like really give yourself over to this, like when you realize like this is all there is for me, this is it now, this is who I am, this is what I do. It's like there's benefits and there's hazards, and I think one of the hazards is that we develop a propensity to greatly absorb the energies of others, which I think I was referencing earlier. And that can be good. It could also be disastrous. And I think when it mixes with our own kind of unhealed energies or emotions or wounds, that's when it takes on a whole new form. And I have, which is why, you don't see people that do this work last very long. Some of us can last for many years, but the vast majority of people that do rise and fall, and I've seen many of them. I've seen enough of them to know that that is an absolute literal reality for some people. And every now and then there's, extenuating circumstances. We make different choices. Sometimes we just choose it differently. But I've noticed that the people that continue to follow four key areas of self development, once again, not that there's only four, but those that follow those tend to remain. Doesn't mean they don't evolve, doesn't mean they don't change. It's just something remains whole within them. And I've often seen that fail with people who suddenly make this choice. I'm going to be a spiritual teacher. I'm going to be a spiritual influencer or a disclosure celebrity, or whatever it is. They will sort of embody this path, and they'll really ride it out, and within the process of that, they won't really develop anything about themselves. They never really confront their shadow. They never fully detox the body. Not that we can fully detox it, it's a work in progress, but there's so many things that get left undone, that what I've noticed over the years is like I just said, it's you can choose it. It doesn't mean it's going to work, but I've noticed the ones that make it work, it tends to choose you. It's like I said earlier, there was never a point where I was like, "You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna live under the uncertainty of having to teach people tarot and to somehow market myself to, all these people across the world as a viable option for spiritual guidance." Yeah, that's what I'll do, and I will base all of the income and security in my life upon it. So if that doesn't work, I've got nothing left to fall back on. Who would make that kind of a choice? I think that choice was made for me, but I do see people do that at times, and they can pull some, success out of it. But I've just noticed for those that are really meant to do this, I'll probably say this again on the next page, or on different on at another stage in this book. For those who are really meant to do this, you will learn at a certain point that it's the only thing you can do. That's when, it's often where everything changes. Anyway, let's keep going. When I got started, there weren't too many people I could turn to. The majority of people I knew during that time of my life were in very different stages of this journey. And truth be told, not all of them were very forthcoming about their processes of activation. Which, sorry to add so much commentary, but that was something I learned really, really quickly. I think I was very naive when I started this work. I was so naive to think that I would be welcomed by others who did the work that I do. That they would be like, "Yeah, yeah, you're like us. Come and hang out, or be a part of my friend group, or whatever the thing was." I was very naive, and I thought that people would welcome me, and they would be like, "Yay, someone that's can help." And that was not the case. Absolutely not. There were a number of people, I could name them, but it's pointless, who treated me as if they had some secret that they had to hold on to so tightly that they couldn't, you know, let it out. That if I learned their secret, that I would become like them or overtake them in some way. I literally had that conversation with another man at a certain point, and I was like, "What? Are you serious? You really think that?" That's literally what. Oh, all right, okay. And granted, there was a lot of posturing and weirdness, and I remember many intervals of having strange social interactions with people that would sort of lord themselves over me from their place of well, I have over 1,000 clients and I'm doing all this work on all these dimensions. And I remember reaching out to another person in particular who nobody would know here, so the name is irrelevant. But I remember reaching out to this person, and they were like, "Well, okay, I could probably help you, but first I'm going to send you some telepathic messages and we'll see if you get them," type of I'm going to hang this thing out there and we'll just see if you can perceive me. And I just want to be totally honest with you. I don't think that person was sending out anything telepathically. It was like they were just playing these mind games and power games with people. And what I learned very early on was that a lot of people that did the work that I do were, while they were very talented, they were working under like incredible amounts of just social and emotional wounding and insecurities that were still very present in their life. Not to say that I don't have the same ones, I definitely have my own version of them. But it was just, I was so naive to think that I would be accepted or that people would want what I had or that people would think, oh, how cool, you're a professional psychic. You know what I mean? That was not it at all. That's been very rare for me. Most people are like, what? Oh, anyway, cool. Yeah. All right. You know what I mean? It's like it did not have the impact that I was expecting. So I don't know. You guys might have a different experience with that. But anyway, let me get back to what is going on here. Um, so at that time of my life, we're in very different stages of this journey, and truth be told, not all of them were very forthcoming about their processes of activation. We just discussed that. That's one of the primary reasons why I will always be grateful to Britain for seeing me, quote unquote, in this life and giving so freely of everything she had learned. In the end, my involvement with her was short lived, and we eventually went our separate ways under completely human circumstances. That is to say, that we totally stopped talking to each other and shit got really weird, which is absolutely true. It literally did. While I now know that was exactly how it was meant to go, at the time, I felt she eventually tried to own me in some way, like a young protege that was under her control and exclusive guidance. And at the time, that was not something I could handle or accept. I found that with every one of those early stage relationships that gave me pieces of myself, there was also a strange expectation or a desire underneath it all. And my God, that could not be any more true. And that was the case for her. That was the case for people that I met at the store that I worked at. That was the case for, notable people in our community that I worked with for a short time previous years. It was like there was always some kind of an expectation or a desire or there was never just I'll tell you freely what I think is going on, or let me tell you how this works. It was more like you give me and I give you. And here's the thing, that's very much how our world works. That's not, it's nothing new. We know this. It's very human, whether you love it or hate it. It's one of the social dynamics of our world. But it seemed as though I was shocked by how much more pronounced that was within the world I was entering in. And I'll be real, I had a very hard time, after kind of splitting off from this person that had helped me in the beginning. It was very strange. It was like I realized I had to very quickly burn a bridge, which sounds horrible, but it was like I had to. That's exactly what was supposed to happen, as evidenced by what happened afterward and the ways my life changed later on. And so eventually, I ended up learning that if I truly sought guidance from higher realms in a way that didn't come with strings or expectations attached, that I needed to become that person for myself. And a part of me likes to think that that's what has happened. I think I said this on Acre Haven's show last night. I did not have the right mentors. I mean, I had what I needed in order to get where I was. Later on, and even now at this stage of my life, there's not that many people that I can turn to. And, whether that's by design or whether that's through my own kind of, social dysfunction, I learned that I had to become that person for myself. That was really the only way. I had to awaken that aspect of my own inner teacher. And anyway, getting back to it, in the years since, this idea has been proven to me countless times. I eventually learned that there was no one other than me responsible for the next stages of my development, and that if I truly wanted to walk my own path, I really did have to become my own teacher, guide, and mentor. The funny thing is, in this process of molding myself into that very person, I seem to have somehow started to become this for others. The very first time this was truly reinforced to me was in late 2020, When seemingly out of nowhere, I was guided to begin a process of dedicated group training. My wife Honora and I recruited a team of 12 people from literally all over the world and took them through a process of regular private sessions, the classes I had put together, and what ultimately was a process of modeling my very distinct method of connecting with spirit. It was different from merely holding classes. We would meet with people and repeat over and over again energy clearing processes, readings, and then process these things in biweekly groups. We discussed what it was like, how it was going, and what kind of unique blockages or epiphanies they ran into along the way. The truth is that the first group was one of the most talented groups of people I have ever known in this life. And a few of them are still engaged in their own paths of doing this work to this very day. It was like something in my life had come full circle, and now I was being called to help others go through their own processes of activation. Since 2020, we have facilitated a dedicated training group every year. I would say, except for 2025 and maybe 2026, because I'm kind of changing the model around that. But we've had some cases a large group, in some cases a small group. I remember in 2024, somehow I attracted a group of people who didn't want to be a group. They all wanted to work individually in their own ways, which was very interesting because when I introed it, it was like, we're going to do a new, I think that was supposed to be group 5 or something. And everyone wanted to work in their own. And then I remember, or maybe there was, and then 2023 was one of the smaller groups we did, which was honestly one of my favorite ones of all time. That was a very, very differently kind of aimed group. It was a lot more about reconditioning the body. It was a lot more about meditating. It was less about instruction. Honestly, that I love those people. That was one of my all-time favorite ones. I think that was 2023. My dates might be a little off. I know I didn't do one of them in 25. So anyway, we might do another group process in the coming months. I think about it a lot. I feel that it's appropriate. I don't know that it's something that our larger kind of soul group is in desire of right now. I noticed that during COVID, it was very, very popular. And I think that one of the things about the COVID era was that people didn't really have any other option but to connect in that manner. And so I think, for those of us that do this work, when the world goes into disaster, oh my God, that is when you will be called upon. So be ready for it. You know what I mean? And that was what I got to experience. And so, each one of our intuitive activation groups has been very, very different. There was even a very problematic one. I think that was group 2 or 3, which we had some very chaotic people. It did not go as planned, you know what I mean? It went very well for a lot of people that were there, but for other people, it was like, wow, how did you? I mean, granted, there's no mistakes, but it really opened my eyes to the social dynamics of things that I needed to sort of refine and work on in a certain way. And so since 2020, we have facilitated a dedicated training group every year. In the time since, I've learned a lot about what works for some and what does not work for others. If there has been one takeaway, it is that while this is still a highly unique individual process, there are a few standardized areas of development that many of us will have to embark upon if we are ever going to get to the stage where we can effectively demonstrate and use these abilities. And what are those standardized areas of development? That's where we began talking about the first gateway, which is detox and deprogramming, which is a whole other conversation. Be ready for that one next week. We're going to get very specific. Hopefully, we'll stay within the YouTube guidelines of what we can talk about, because there's some other elements that we'll talk about in the 4 gateways that I think if I'm careful, I can talk about them properly on YouTube, especially in the detoxification part. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap it up there. I have time for your questions if anyone has any questions or anything they want to discuss before we go. But that was essentially it. That was my experience with sort of the preparation for the stage of my life in which I was meant to pass on what I had learned through these, passing through what I call the four gateways in my own way. And so, just because I've already mentioned it, for those of you guys that don't already know, the first gateway is always detox and deprogramming. That is where we must unlearn what we have learned, and a lot more, a lot of clearing of, just density within the physical body, toxicity within the mind, heavy metals, all kinds of stuff. I know that detox is all the rage nowadays, so a lot of you guys will have already heard what we're going to talk about next week. But I can and will give you the list of things that I have worked with, that I have taken, that I have used in order to get myself through the ongoing detox process over the years. Some of the things were mentioned in the book, and some of them are things that I've changed and sort of brought in since then. And just things that you can take, things that you can work with, techniques that you can use to really detoxify the mindset of the previous version of yourself. I really believe in my heart of hearts that is the first gateway. And that comes with a lot of things. It's not just about detoxing the body. There's like so many layers of the mind that we have to confront. I shouldn't say confront. We just have to take account of and become aware of them. Some of them will confront, some of them will remain, some of them we will delete, some of them will enhance. You know what I mean? Some of them were never ours to begin with and need to be drained out of the body, which I think is the case for a vast majority of us, especially if you're one of the people that finds these videos, that is part of the larger soul group of people that watch this channel, and probably a lot of others that dive into the same topics. It's like opening and clearing the mind and the body, I believe, is the one stage that we can't really do without. Because if you don't go through that process, at least in a limited form, your judgment is always going to be wanting, your clarity is always going to be different. You're going to be very easily led astray by other people with stronger energy. You're going to lead yourself into chapters of confusion, all sorts of second guessing of the self. It's as if all of your oldest emotional wounds will reactivate inside your body at a certain stage. Man, that is absolutely true. But we'll get more specific on that next time. I'm going to scan through and see if there's any questions or comments here. And totally. What up? Quantum entanglement, THC. I sure hope you can send some of that over here. It's kind of in a non-smoking phase. Well, not kind of, I am in a non-smoking phase currently. It will return. I'm not one of those people that believes you have to be like completely 100% sober all the time. Although for some people it is a requirement. I'm not saying that's exactly what everyone needs, but I know for me there's been chapters where I'm like, I definitely have to stop for a while, and more so for health reasons, I would say. But that's a conversation for next week. Eric says, Matthew, suggestions on spiritual hygiene. Yes, do not want to absorb suggestion on yet. I'm not sure I understand the second part, but I would say on spiritual hygiene, the first stage, or the first thing I would say, is get to know yourself above all else. Know where you began and where that person, or where you end and that person begins. Learn what you really believe. Be comfortable with holding yourself in your own knowledge of who you are and who you have become, even if you're not sure at this stage. I think knowledge of self is indispensable. We have to be aware of our biases. We have to be aware of our wounds. We have to be aware of our tendencies, our addictions. I think that one of the first layers of spiritual hygiene is awareness of the self. Like, what am I carrying? What am I holding on to? What am I swimming around in? What wounds am I seeing reflected in the actions of other people that don't necessarily even have anything to do with me? Or in some cases it does. I think that's one of the first stages, is awareness. I'm not a person that's an advocate of protection and shielding. I think in many cases, not all, but in many cases, those are just sort of suggestions that we are making to our internal self to make us feel more whole, make us feel more protected, make us feel more shielded. when the reality is the source of a lot of discomfort and confusion that we experience as a result of other relationships is often born from that very essence within us. And so that's a very long-winded way of saying that again. That I think knowledge of self is the first stage. I think detoxification of the body, removing heavy metals, removing toxins, removing pesticides, removing anything that you can that's deleterious to your mindset or the health of the physical body is critical. Not that we can do all of those things, it's always a work in progress, it's an ongoing thing. But I would say awareness, constant detoxification, maybe not every single day, but like a regular process of clearing the self. And then um, this will be an unexpected answer, but I think lymphatic stagnancy plays a massive role in judgment, in your judgment and your awareness and the way you perceive truth. I think it has a dramatic impact on that. So, learning to clear lymph, learning to circulate lymph in your body will, I believe, have a huge effect on your own clarity and um, probably a bunch of other things. I'm drawing a blank on what more to say there, but I would start with awareness, detoxification, and especially like move around. Like I think there's so much stagnancy that occurs within the physical body that only when you start really moving it, and I hate to say it, like exercising in some way or just moving the self. That was something I saw very early on, which we'll talk more about next week. When I used to go to conferences more often. I went to Conscious Life Expo in Los Angeles for several years in a row. And I just noticed over the years how the people that were the big names, you know, the big cool so and so's, they all seem to be deteriorating in some weird way. Not all of them, mind you, but a lot of them seem to go through a process of physical degradation. And I noticed that so early on that I was like, why? Why do they all become totally mutated in some way? And I had a really good example of that, which I was going to save this to talk about next week. I'll just hint at it today, but I don't know this person's name, so I can't call them out. I wouldn't do it anyway because I'm sure they're very talented. But there was this one dude that used to come to a lot of conferences, and he would set up a table, and I think he might even have been in a wheelchair at one point later on, but he was just this very large man, and he was doing all these readings. And I remember the first conferences I saw him at were at Corey Good's conferences, and I was there obviously, and I remember seeing this guy over the course of like 5 years. And what I noticed was that every time I would see him at another event, he seemed to be falling apart. It was like some part of his body was more misshapen and he was becoming this crazy weird blob of a human, and I was like, "Oh, what is happening?" And when I really looked into the energy, it was like one of the reasons why, or at least my belief was that one of the reasons why he was so accurate within his readings and so plugged into other people's energies was number one, because he would just absorb shit from people and just pull it in. And I think that's a really simple way of learning or unconsciously reading people's energy that can lead to great accuracy but toxicity within the self. And we do see this with traditional shaman in some cases, where they will viscerally like suck up people's energy and like pass it out of their body, and some of that will always stay with you unless you make real concerted attempts to release it. And anyway, not getting into who this person was in particular, it's more the object of the story is how I watched how certain people would degrade themselves. They would just deteriorate over the years. And I think the last time I saw him, the first couple of years he was walking around and, in a totally different form. And by the last time I saw him, he was confined to a wheelchair with helpers and like doing really good work. But I was like, whoa, what did you not maintain in your life? What did you not keep up with? Because that's a thing that we see for a lot of, like I was saying earlier, a lot of people that do this work, you will go through a certain series of, you know, things that you have to contend with in your own way. Anyway, let's keep going. I don't know. Maybe that answers nothing for you. Joanna says, days of multiple sessions will often have me feeling and looking like shit for the day. Yeah, yeah, that can happen. That's a good sign of overabsorbance. I shouldn't say absorbency. At times, we just sort of exhaust ourselves in it, and that is very, very real. You know what though? The cool thing about that is, I think for those that devote themselves to that path, where that is a thing that you do all day, multiple times a day, even if it's not every day, there is a massive change that comes over your understanding of how to connect with spirit. You know, your confidence will grow, which sometimes can be problematic, but it really refines you. It really refines you and strengthens you, and, you know, like I said, could create problems at the same time, but, I felt that. I think that was my 2019 and 2020, which I've talked about before in, like, other sessions or maybe in other, you know, like, episodes of this weird show, but in 2019 and 2020, I saw over 1,000 people a year, which I didn't know was possible until I looked at the numbers afterward. I mean, at the time, I realized that I was seeing 3 to 6 people a day for about an hour to an hour and a half each, and I was doing that 7 days a week, and it, you know, like I said, when I say this is the only thing I do, for a couple years straight, it was the only thing that I did. Like, there was no other. There was, like, you know, Nora would go out and get me food and get, you know, and I'm grateful that she really took really good care of me during that stage because I was insane. It was like I would see so many people a day, especially in 2019. That was like explosion timeline, just absolutely exploded. And 2020 as well. Maybe 2020 more so in terms of just exhaustion, but I mean, it got so bad at a certain point, I did not know who I was talking to. I didn't know their name. You know what I mean? All I knew was like, okay, you're here for this, and here's what's going on in your life, and we would go through this process together. And at times, I'll be real, I felt kind of fucked up about it at times because it depersonalized a lot of the work that I was doing from the perspective that like I wasn't, or I did not remain uniquely aware of the individual, you know, kind of things about each person, and I was sort of going through it at times and in like an assembly line manner, you know, like, okay, this and this and this and this. All right, good. We're going to do this and this and this and this and this row. And okay, here we go. Are you ready to begin? And I'm not saying that was the way I approached it or acted it out. It was just that was sort of the mindset. And it wasn't a conscious thing. It was like something within me had to go through, I think, this period of intense, like hyper intense repetition to the extent that something had gotten like burned into my brain. It was like a thing that I could never forget. And I think that could have only happened by seeing over 1,000 people during those years because it literally changed me. It changed me in a way that in some ways was not so good. In some ways it transformed everything that I did. I think it set me up for success from the perspective that, you know, even if you just call it pattern recognition, you know what I mean? You will learn a tremendous amount. I mean, absolutely, like so much about what you're doing, about what you're doing wrong, about what you're doing right, about what works, about what doesn't work. And I think that's why I feel very comfortable at this stage saying when it comes to the process of intuitive development, I can say with great assurance, I know what works for some people and I know what works doesn't work for a lot more people. Why? Because I lived through it. I watched it. I saw it with other people. I saw what happens when they gave themselves over to other forces. I saw what happened when, you know, this took place or that took place, or we didn't, you know, complete that, or, you know, we didn't develop discernment. I saw people with, you know, everything from reptilians attached to them, like we mentioned in this book, to people that were just going through deep, deep loss in their life or mourning. I saw people that were dying of cancer. I worked with a woman who was literally on death's door for 2 years straight. I saw her almost every week for almost an entire year. I've talked about this in the past. Sorry to rant on and on about such things, but it really changed the way I learned to approach spirit by being conditioned by so many opportunities and so many different faces. And during that 2019 to 2020, and also in 2021, although much less so, that was like the wave sort of crested during 2021 and 2022. But I saw so many people during that period of time. I think it made me into what I am today in a way that could not have been done otherwise. And yet, I got sick, I got crazy, I lost out. I think I willingly let go of a lot of relationships and friendships during that time period, because I was like, no, I have to do this. I have to do this. I have to show up every day and do this thing. And I was very, very devoted to it. Sometimes I would say to a fault, you know what I mean? And so, anyway, we don't have to go on and on. I way overdid that answer. Rami says it's like they're melting. Yeah, people did sort of meld into one. I'd be like, I don't even know your name. Here we go, which is funny, because I've read how that does happen to people, and in some cases that leads people to some of the most deep and meaningful work, which sounds contradicting in a sense, but I experienced it. It's like I removed myself from the process so many times that I got to watch what it was like when I wasn't even really a key player in it, which sounds creepy to some people. Sounds really creepy to some people. It was like I would give myself over to this form of energy that I knew if I followed it correctly and sort of kept walking the path, that good things would happen. And honestly, they did. They did. Going back to that woman that I worked with for 2 years, I don't know why I chose to mention her, but she was definitely one of those people that came in with a great illness. And I'm not saying our work had any real effect on it, but I did notice over that 2 year period how in the very beginning of our journey, it was always like, I'm dying, I'm dying, I'm dying. And then at a certain point, there was no more talk about dying. It was like this whole other process took place. And then it was honestly like they would just come in to meet with me so she could literally cuss me out in every session and tell me how I was ruining her life. Like, and I was like, really? Wow, thank you. It was like I became like the item that she would like project all of her wounds upon and just be like, you did this to me. And I remember being like, wow, I had no idea. That's so wild. Things that I had no knowledge of, but it showed me the processes of the ways some people needed to release energy. And I got to watch like how that comes in so many different forms based on who the person is, what their issues are, what they're going on in their life, what their modeling was like as children, the way they learned about how to conduct themselves in a relationship. It's like I got to see so many layers and patterns of like behavior that I don't know. I still use a lot of those understandings to this very day. I would like to think in part that's why we continue to have success in what I do. Granted, not 1,000 people a year now. At this point, we're at like 2 or 3 a week, sometimes more, sometimes 4 or 5, 6, sometimes every day, sometimes not. It goes very up and down, but it feels much more appropriate. It's like yeah, it's much more appropriate. Uncle Creepy says, sounds draining. It was. It was quite draining at times. Andromeda says, so many imposters in the disclosure community. One on my mind, Edie, Corey, Gosiha. I don't know who Gosi. Oh, I can never say her name from that other channel. Yes, yes. Also, imposters saying there were some Egyptian gods and goddesses. Yeah, you'll see a lot of like the weird kind of toxic ego stuff. I'm sure I have my own version of it. You know what I mean? I think all of us have our own version of some kind of outwardly expressed toxicity that continues to show up. I know for me, I can tell you one of the areas in which it shows up, which is not a good area, but I think it's good to own, our own shadow elements and be like, yeah, I'll do that. I've come to realize I have no fear about arguing or fighting with people, even if I'm wrong. It's like, yeah, you want to argue? Let's do it. You know what I mean? Which is not a good, that's not a good one. You know what I mean? I have no problem with that, which can lead to problems in other ways. And it has. And you'll just notice your own tendencies in some form or another. And I definitely noticed my own. It can bring out good parts of yourself, chaotic parts of yourself. Ragged Cat said, "It happened to me in my work. It felt sacred. It certainly was. It made me what I am. It made me what I am to this very day. It taught me that what I was doing was real. It showed me that the world wanted what I had. It showed me that there was value to these things that seemed to come out of nowhere into my mind's eye, which was one of the most extreme acts of faith that I have ever engaged in this entire life, which I've said a lot of times on this channel and other settings. It was like being willing to step off a cliff, knowing that there was nothing there to catch me. And I think for the period between 2019 and I would say 2022 is when things definitely tapered down. So a good, what's that, like 3 years or so? That was the name of the game. It was like sort of getting out of your own way and allowing yourself to become something different, and it was honestly one of the best times of my entire life. I mean, I'm sure there's still much better things to come, but yeah, you just keep going and keep going and keep going. The multiple sessions are great teachers. Totally, totally. And some of them are chaotic as well, you know what I mean? I worked with a lot of really wild, wild people over the years. When the time comes, that does feel like a very appropriate book. It'll be a shorter book, but I mean, a certain amount of them I've talked about, in here, and there's certainly a number of them that came through in the book, but man, there are so much crazy stuff. I've had people literally transform into altars, start screaming at me in strange languages. I've watched them roll their eyes back in their heads involuntarily and begin to writhe in weird positions on their couch and not even knowing that they did it. And I've also watched people engage in that same behavior as a performance aspect in certain sessions. I've learned when is it real, when is it not real, which is a hard one to face at times because you'll see a lot of people go through states of portrayal in sessions like that. I remember working with this one woman who was channeling for a while. I've talked about this briefly in the past. She was just, she was a practitioner in her own right, and she was channeling and just really opening herself up. And at one point in the sessions we were doing, she would like snap into an altar, or this being would start talking through her, and it was chaotic, man. It was like this whole other person would come in ways that I still don't see with channelers, in ways where I'm like, damn, if you were out there doing that on the world stage, you probably would have been a billionaire right now. But this person had no desire of doing so. It was just like there was a completely different level of embodiment. And I got to watch this woman become different beings right in front of my eyes. I'm not saying she transformed her entire body, but her energy would shift in such a way that, here we are 5 or 6 years later, and I'm still talking about it. You know what I mean? I remember working, for a while with some person. I won't say where they worked, but they were pretty high up. And honestly, this is where I've never really talked about this. Pretty high up in government, like an actual. I can't even say. I shouldn't even say it. I will wait for the right time. But some people that I never thought would be attracted to the work that I did from a completely different, we'll call it a judicial industry, if that makes any sense. I started to attract people from that realm at a certain time, people that were wanting to, develop their psychic discernment in other ways. There was a series of medical professionals that showed up for a while. It was like a theme for a while, where these people would book with me and they'd be like, yeah, it turns out I'm actually a physician working in this and this and that. And I was, not only did they have their own issues they were working through, but it was like, I'm just wondering, how can I open up the aspect of myself that is more intuitive and understand on a greater level what's going on inside these people's bodies. And I think those were some of the experiences that set me up for understanding that I could do medical psychic work. It was like it came through the confirmation of people that would book from me as an actual medical professional, and I would bounce ideas off them and say certain things, and they were like, yes, yes, that's it, that's exactly how it works. And I'd be like, wow, it's funny because I've never learned that, but somehow I'm able to listen to your voice and tell you that that's what's going on in your body, which was a very, very strange thing to behold. And then I also noticed within that group of people that there were some people that would come in and be very threatened, which was weird. They would be very threatened by that, and I was like, well, okay, maybe we're not supposed to dive into that here. So it was so many experiences in such a short period of time that, anyway, I could go on and on and on, but I won't. We just hit our 2-hour mark. Perfect, perfect timing. We'll see if there's any questions before we go. Andromeda says, hi, Matthew. How does someone know he or she's psychic level? I don't know that you can. I don't know that it's like a leveled thing. I don't know that there's like gradated, like you're in this level or that level. I firmly believe everyone has a set of very specific abilities. And I'm not sure that there's a way that you can really accurately gauge, like, or like quantify, I guess, if that's the word you're looking for, or the right word, how psychic or intuitive a person is. I think it varies greatly at the time of day or the mindset or the emotional condition of each person. Like for me, there's days in which I'm dead on and it's like, oh my God, holy shit, that was amazing. And there's a lot of days where I'm like, kind of feels like, you know what I mean? You're gonna have that. It's not about, like rising to some level and remaining at that level. I would say it's, like I was saying earlier, it's more about the awareness of self and understanding, where am I right now? What is my current status? What do I believe? What do I not believe? What's dark within me? What's light within me? I think with knowledge of self, we have a much greater understanding of what we're capable of, even if we're not in the right condition to express it fully or completely. And so I guess what I'm trying to say, without going on too much longer, is that there is no, like, I would say, accurate way to decide what level a person's on. But one thing I think you can do, and I really do believe this, one thing I think you can do, or rather what I know you can do, is, I'll just say it like this: you do have the ability to gauge what is true or not. And some people will tell you that's not possible, but you absolutely do. We all have that ability. And along what comes with that is the ability, I'll just say it like this in a hard and fast way: you will develop the ability to know who's full of shit and who isn't. And that is absolutely real. And some people will be like, no, you can't. Oh, yes, you can. And you will. And you will. Then you'll begin to see the people in your life in very, very different ways. And so, anyway, thanks for hanging out, everybody. I appreciate you. We're not going to go on any longer. I've rambled on long enough. Somebody will get mad at me. And of course, the YouTube AI probably will not suggest this video to anyone due to its dramatic length. So you can help me greatly by hitting the like button before you go. If you can hype this video, I still don't really know how the video hyping process works, but I think after this video ends, or maybe while it's on, you can like scroll with your thumb on your phone over to the right and it'll say hype video. Because I have done it for Rob's channel before, but that kind of helps, or so I'm told, that helps you get more noticed. I don't know, because like I was saying on Anchor Haven show last night, the more real I get, the more authentic I behave in this world, the less people come around on YouTube. And part of that is, the throttling that the algorithm gives you. But another part of it is the process of attracting new people in our life and sort of detracting the ones that aren't meant to be with us. And so if you're here at the end of this broadcast, you are definitely meant to be here. And so please hit the like button. subscribe if you have not already done so, although you might get unsubscribed anyway. And we will see you, yes, in exactly 1 week, where we get into the first gateway of true psychic activation, what some people call the detox and the deprogramming phase. And don't forget, if you want, yes, you can. Thank you, White Swan. We're doing our tier 2 energy clearing meeting. It's this Sunday. I think it's the 29th at 4 p.m. Eastern. And you will walk away from that experience feeling more grounded. You will feel more present within your body. You will feel a release of tension or anger within the self. And at times you'll express a bit of emotion or just let go of certain things that need to be shed in the energy of the moment. So join us if you feel ready for it. And we will be back in a week. In the meantime, take care, everybody. Stay out of trouble.